It was the end of 2018, our first getaway together as a couple. We went to the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, but we were naive. We thought it'd be more romantic to camp out as far off the beaten path as possible. We walked really far into the woods and got to a spot where nobody passed us all afternoon. We were making s'mores over the campfire after it just gotten dark. All of a sudden, my boyfriend saw a man approaching us slowly. At first we thought it was the park ranger coming to tell us to put out our campfire. So naturally, I began to hide the weed. My boyfriend called out to him, "Hey, can I help you?" We thought it was weird they didn't have any kind of light on him. He didn't even have any camping bag on him. Nothing for camping. Why was he out here so far with no camping gear at night, with no light? Sped up after my boyfriend called out and came right at him. He had this strange look on his eyes, the look absent, blank, and weird. He didn't answer my boyfriend. He just kept walking right at him. Red flags were going off at this point. When my boyfriend realized it wasn't the park ranger, he quickly put his hand in his pocket where he had a concealed knife. Made it clear that he had a weapon. It was only after my boyfriend did this did the guy acknowledge us. He said something weird. "Oh, I just was wondering if y'all having a party." Remember, we're miles away from a single soul, and it was beginning to get dark, and we began to approach us slowly. Without a flashlight, he had no camping gear with him, just a tiny drawstring bag on his back. After he asked what we were doing, we didn't give him any answers, but asked him what was going on. He didn't answer. We just looked past my boyfriend towards the site. It was windy, so we had put up a tarp to shield ourselves. This also meant the guy approaching us couldn't see how many people were at our site. He asked how many people you got with you. He began to circle our site to check us out. He asked again if we had any other people with us. My boyfriend didn't answer. He carried on circling around our camp. Now bear in mind, we had our camp on this crazy steep hill. It was the only spot for miles that was possible to camp. However, he told us that he was going to set up camp nearby. He proceeded to walk off in our direction straight up the hill. We knew for a fact that he couldn't put a campsite there because of the terrain. Remember, he had no light, no bag with camp gear, nothing. We were silent. We listened to his footsteps on the leaves as he walked up the hill in the direction completely off the path. He walked for about 30 seconds and then his footsteps stopped completely. It was just still, silent. We knew he was still there, but we couldn't see him. It was dark. At this point, I was freaking out. I didn't want to seem like a pussy in front of my boyfriend. We had talked about whether we needed to leave. My boyfriend handed me a knife and said if anything happens to him, I should run at this point. At this point, I knew it wasn't just me freaking out unnecessarily. He said we needed to get out of here and just grab the essential items. I was scared that he was about to shoot us dead. Later on, when I told my boyfriend this, he said no, this is the type of guy who would much rather prefer to stab his victims. We began to walk/run down the trail in the pitch black with our flashlights off for at least a mile. My boyfriend looked back to see him staring at one point. He ran behind me to protect me. This experience stuck with me. I still can't think of a rational or non-menacing reason why the guy would be out there late at night. I've tried. Now that this is the end of 2018. Now this was the end of 2018, but my boyfriend, now husband, and I were remembering it last night. I decided to type into Google to see if there were any murders in the same place around the same time. There was. A few months after our incident in the same trail, an unhinged man with crazy eyes approached some hikers at twilight as it was getting dark. He behaved in a deranged and aggressive manner before stabbing a man to death with a 17-inch knife. A woman he was with ran for her life down the trail. Finally, she raised her hands in surrender, and he began to stab her too. Somehow, she managed to get away. The killer carried on wandering down the trail and shouted out to other campers to give him a flashlight, in which they didn't. Thank goodness. All of these details are the same as the guy who approached us. Same age, same deranged eyes, same lack of flashlight, same time to approach us, which was around twilight, same look, same place. The more articles I read, the more I realize this psychopath had been roaming the trails, harassing hikers for a while. A few different people had reported him, not just us. Apparently this erratic and violent psychopath well known to law enforcement along the Appalachian Trail. His name is James Jordan. In the end, we got lucky, and it could have been us. I'm a teenager. I've been in scouting/Boy Scouts for nearly all my life. I've really enjoyed exploring with my friends and being more open to the outdoors. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy was only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking deliberately in the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That was when initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as copies of all the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought was the correct direction, while shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it in two. We didn't follow the road as we knew it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like that was out there in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we did not recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we had been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated that we'd only been gone for 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phones said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd enter an area and the concept of time didn't apply. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlike anything else I've ever heard or experienced. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and the hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of camp. In the summer of 2016, during a summer camp, we went to Henry Cowell Park in California to camp out. The day itself was normal. having fun throughout many activities. In my tent, I was with 3 of my friends, who I'll be calling Sam, Mark, and Dave. We set up our tent in a small open area within a grove of trees. We were on the right side, while the girls set up their tent on the left side. We made s'mores and just hung out. Then we went to sleep. During the middle of the night at around 12-ish, I heard something going through our bags, which were on the table adjacent from our tent. Since it was late, I assumed it was just an animal, like a raccoon. I then fell asleep. But about 15 minutes later, Dave woke me up. He whispered, "Something's pressing up against the tent." I lightly pressed my hand up against the side of the tent. Then, something pressed back. I was frightened for a few seconds, but then, in the end, I ended up chalking it up to be an animal once again. Since we were obviously in the wilderness, we shook off the feeling and fell back to sleep. The next day, I woke up at around 6-ish and had to use the restroom. I opened up the tent flap and was instantly greeted with the sight of some of our bags open and laying all over the floor. I exited the tent to investigate. I then thought about telling my bunkmates and turned my head. The tent had flipped over onto its side. This was strange because we had securely planted the stakes into the rings to hold the tent down. I then noticed that the stakes seemed to have been taken out. What was really strange was that when we were asleep, we had not felt the tent flipping over. Confused and worried, I woke up everyone else, and they were unaware of what happened. We set up the tent once again and went through our bags, although nothing was taken from our bags. Then we went and got our breakfast. Once we got our breakfast, we headed back down to our campsite. We sat on the benches and tried to think of what caused the tent to flip over. I then explained what I heard and felt previous night to my friends. That's when the girls approached our table and then asked us, "Sam, why were you snooping around our tent last night, and why were you staring at us?" We all explained that it wasn't any of us, since none of us exited the tent. We explained what also happened to us last night, and the girls started to freak out. After a while of us trying to find a logical explanation for these events, we eventually came to the agreement to try and forget that this ever happened. My friends and I explained our experiences to the counselors, who could not come up with any explanations. I have explained this story to many of my friends, and we have not been able to come up with a definitive answer on what happened that day.